Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Virtual Rose program from the Southern California News Group. We're your interactive program with SCNG sports journalists here to give you all the background insights and tips you ever need for enjoying the most from the Rose Bowl experience. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor for premium content here at the Southern California News Group. And before we get started, I want to say thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers. And if you're not a subscriber, well, why not? Go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper and join us as a subscriber. I need to tell you a few things before we get started. As an attendee, you're going to be muted, but if you have questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar on your screen. And certainly, if you want to make comments and connect with other audience members, use the chat feature found there as well. This session will be videotaped and a link and the slides will be sent to you so you can share or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's posted at scng.com/virtual events as well. And that's where you can find all of our past virtual shows as well as see what's coming up. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's host. He's the assistant sports editor and UCLA football reporter for the Southern California News Group, James H. Williams. James has worked with SCNG for close to 9 years and has covered everything from local sports to pro sports. He's a voter for several college football awards and he hosts 2 UCLA football related podcasts. Welcome, James.
Samantha, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Super excited to be here. Super excited for this time of year, not only because it's the holiday season, but because we get to have extra college football to finish out the season and the year. Joining me for our conversation about the Rose Bowl and the Rose Bowl game is longtime columnist Joe Blackstock.
And that's my cue. I'll see you guys later.
Joe, how are you doing?
James. Okay, thank you, James. My pleasure to participate in all this.
We are thankful to have you here. First of all, happy holidays to you, and let's jump right into it. The Rose Bowl and the Rose Bowl game. As someone who's been in the area for some time now as a local resident, when you hear about the Rose Bowl and the Rose Bowl game, what comes to mind for you? What are some of the first things that kind of jump out?
Well, I've lived my 75 years, all of them here in Southern California, and so the Rose Bowl continues to be something special, at least to me. I think if you're relatively young out there, the Rose Bowl is one of a bunch of other bowls that are going on right around this period of time. But I can remember when the Rose Bowl was the big event. I can even remember before there were Dodgers, before there were Lakers, before the Rams were much anything, that the Rose Bowl game was the Super Bowl, was the biggest thing in Southern California. Not only was it a big supporter of drawing people from the snowy east to come here, but it was a major thing. It was a major thing for the West Coast teams, the Big Ten. This was the prize at the end of the football season. This was it. There was no national championship, and if you were in Iowa or Illinois or Michigan or someplace, and your team won the conference, the big prize over that was coming to Pasadena and playing in the game. The big time thing. So it was probably not quite as exciting as it is in the past. Today it is. Today it is no longer quite the same way. But in the past, they sold every ticket. It was hard to find a ticket to the game, regardless of who was playing. And it was the major event in some ways in all of Southern California.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up some good points, and we'll talk more about what the Rose Bowl is doing a little bit later on in the show to help stay a little relevant. I think that's important. Some of the moves they're making and some of the tradition they're in some way moving away from. but I think you do bring up some good points. And one thing, as someone who covers UCLA football, I'm at the Rose Bowl at least every other week during the season. And one thing that is often brought to my attention when I do radio shows and different things with some of the for some of the outlets, media outlets for some of the visiting teams when they come into the Rose Bowl, is they talk about the Rose Bowl, and there's still that prestige and that historic kind of value to it. And sometimes I kind of realized that I've taken it for granted in a little bit, because I was just kind of showing up sometimes and just covering the game and not realizing, like, you're in the Rose Bowl, like, maybe I don't know, just take it in a little bit more than I have previously. And that was something that people kind of brought to my attention over time. Based on some of the different places they've been to, it doesn't get any better than the Rose Bowl. So I'm excited to be at the game again this year. Again, we'll be talking a little bit more about the game here later on in the show. But I'm just kind of curious about, well, one thing that stood out to me, talking to the Pasadena mayor, Victor Gordo, is he kind of mentioned the reasoning behind the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl. And what he said, just kind of paraphrasing, was it was kind of used as an economic development tool to help attract people to the city of Pasadena and the state of California. Again, you mentioned Michigan, Ohio, places like that, Iowa. You're getting some of these different fan bases and different parts of people from different parts of the country to come in. What are your kind of thoughts when you hear about that, and how that's maybe kind of developed over time?
Well, I think the one thing that I was looking back and preparing for this was the interesting thing that in 1916 really was the first continuous start of games here. But it was 20 years before another bowl game somewhere else in the country. For 20 years, this was the big deal. There was no television. Neither the games nor the parade were shown on TV, but photographs appeared in the next day's newspapers. This was the game that people paid attention to. There was nothing else going on. And every time you get even photographs of Pasadena where it's 75 degrees or something, and everybody's in shirt sleeve watching a football game, and everybody's freezing under 12 feet of snow in upstate New York, that's where they start thinking about, well, maybe what a treat it would be to go to Pasadena anytime and to come here. And it's a good reason why there are so many people whose parents were born elsewhere who are now living here. And it was a big, and then the game, in 1925, you had Newt Rockne and the Four Horsemen.
Mhm.
That was the year before the USC Notre Dame series began. It was a big deal. In 29, you had the famous Roy Regals running the wrong way with a fumble to land in the other team's end zone and ended up losing the game. All these were very exciting things well before there was any television of any of this. And then, of course, when TV came, people were able to see I can remember watching the parade and the game all in black and white, but when color came in, holy cow, that was a major breakthrough in all of this thing, and bringing people freaking and saying Pasadena, boy, that's someplace I gotta go to, whether it's for January 1st or any time of the year.
And speaking of that being a place that you wanted to go to, if I'm not mistaken, as a former sports writer, you were able to cover a Rose Bowl game. What do you remember about that?
Well, I covered actually one of the greatest ones, at least from a West Coast point of view. It was the 1976 game in which UCLA defeated Ohio State. Ohio State had come into the game undefeated. They were number one team. All they planned to do was to come in here and beat this unranked UCLA team and win the national championship. Woody Hayes was all excited on all this sort of stuff, and And I remember it was one of the longest days of my life. Myself and my colleague Joe Smiler, another sports writer, got there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and game started at 2. It was over at 3 or at 5. We did our interviews, got in a traffic jam for 2 hours, and then drove all the way back to our office in West Covina and wrote a story. And I think I arrived home with a monstrous headache about midnight. But it was an experience to just like anybody going to a game today, or whether or way back then. It was special. Everything on the field, even 3 hours before the game, it was special. Watching all that went on, and I'll always remember that. But I also don't ever run or go to another game, given the traffic and everything like that. To be honest.
Yeah, the way you laid out some of that, a lot of that still holds up, Joe. So if you ever got an itch to go back, don't go, because a lot of what you said still exists for me covering the Rose Bowl nowadays. Getting home late, getting there early. They open the press box a little bit early for media, so I get down there earlier than I would if I was just showing up to watch the game as a fan. But even with that, because of the traffic and the different things that go on down there, I have to leave even earlier. So 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, around that time sounds about right. But it's a great time, and I keep coming back year after year. I just love it. I love everything about it. And again, like for me, one of the most exciting things about it, again, covering UCLA football, is the crowd, right? Because UCLA has kind of had some down years. Obviously, they're turning things around over this past season and last year. They've had some winning seasons and starting to turn things around. And so the fan base and the crowds at the Rose Bowl are starting to improve during the season. But in my early years with covering UCLA football, and then all of a sudden I'm covering the Rose Bowl game, it was such a huge jump in attendance. They would limit the capacity for the UCLA games, and that has just changed so much when you get to the Rose Bowl game. And I was in awe of just sitting in the press box and watching and looking at different colors in the crowd from what UCLA and whatever the Pac-12 team may be in there on any other given day. But just the crowd and hearing them cheer for their team whenever there's a touchdown scored, feeling the press box rock. I'm just like, whoa, like we don't get some of this during the UCLA games, just because there's not as many people. They're starting the games earlier in the day. But again, it's that historic and prestige, like everything that just comes with the Rose Bowl, let alone you have two teams from that may not normally play every other week like UCLA does coming into the Rose Bowl. It's just an exciting like atmosphere. And for me, I'm just excited to kind of just be there and soak it all in. But talk about the crowd and maybe how that's grown over the years, or what you've kind of noticed, maybe what kind of trends you've noticed with the stadium.
Well, what I think what the crowd that I think is most interesting is one I had no experience with at all, which would have been 100 years ago on Sunday. It was the first Rose Bowl game played in a brand new Rose Bowl. They had been playing elsewhere in the city, but this was the first one in there. And the police chief, I remember reading a quote from him about how he had never seen crowds like this before, because you had 400,000 people along Colorado Boulevard ready for finishing the parade, and then all these people for the first time heading to the football game. And everything was jammed up. It got to the point where it was ironically Penn State was the out-of-state team, and their team got all jammed in the traffic jam. They couldn't get to the stadium. The police chief finally ordered the cars or the buses or whatever it was that was taking them there. They had to drive for 4 blocks on the sidewalk in order to get to the field on time. They didn't get there on time. The game was supposed to start at 2:15. It started at 3. There were no, but the crowds were overwhelmed. They had more people than they'd ever had for this sort of thing, and there were no lights. So the game ended basically in darkness because it started so late and everything like that. But the crowds were cheering and going crazy, and everybody was just very excited over that. things have improved a little bit, but the one thing that never changes is the traffic and the crowds.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It definitely doesn't. I was at UCLA hosted USC at this last regular season Pac-12 or Pac-12 matchup between the two teams. And ever since I covered UCLA, I don't know, for whatever reason. Well, one of the years was the pandemic year when when USC had last come to the Rose Bowl. And so there was no crowd. So there was no traffic. But prior to that, every other time I had covered USC, UCLA had been in the Coliseum. So I thought I can just show up at my normal time for a UCLA game. And Joe, I was wrong. The traffic it was still there. I barely made it down like before kickoff. It was a mess, but that's what I love about it too, is like there's so many people, and while you get upset for a second because you're waiting in line coming down the hill, you just realize this place is going to be packed and rocking, and it's going to be a great game regardless of where the teams are in terms of records and whatnot. So that alone was just very exciting, and it was a good reminder that you need to make sure you get down there with enough time once you can soak it all
But it's
in.
worth it.
Oh,
But
without
it's
a
worth
doubt.
it.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's the beauty of it all.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate you sharing your insight. Samantha, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I know that you are the font of all knowledge.
Mhm.
Being a longtime columnist, you've seen it all. Listen, thank you for sharing that. And James, I wanted to point out that we do have a question from Marcia
Yes.
Nickler. She says, I'm an Ohio State University grad. Does Ohio State still have an opportunity to play at the Rose Bowl? Why or why not? That might help you segue into what's going on next. I'll leave you to it.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question there from Marcia. Unfortunately, they are not going to be able to make it into the Rose Bowl this year. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad reason for them not to be in it this year, just because there is something bigger at stake for them. They are one of 4 teams that will be competing in the college football playoff, along with their rival Michigan. And then you'll also have TCU, and you'll have Georgia, the defending national championship. They'll be competing on Saturday. I don't remember who's in what bowl off the top of my head. I believe they're going to be in Atlanta. Ohio State will be against number 1 Georgia in the All-State Sugar Bowl out there. Yeah, in Atlanta. So they'll have an opportunity to compete for a national championship. It's going to be a semifinal game for them. And yeah, I mean, or else they would have qualified for the Rose Bowl, both them or Michigan, but because both of them are in the national title conversation, they are not going to be playing in the Rose Bowl. And that's how you get a team like Penn State that will be in there competing for the first time against Utah. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I think, oh, wait, no, we don't have another question. That was already the same one, but I know that you've got more conversation coming up with one of our longtime sports reporters. So I'll just let you intro that and we'll get rolling. Thanks.
Yeah, I was able to be joined where we did a pre-recording with my fellow colleague and USC beat writer, Adam Grossbard. Me and him sat down and had a conversation about the current state of the Rose Bowl game, where it's headed, and kind of previewing some of what we'll see in that matchup. So without a further ado, let's get to that conversation. Hey, Adam, thanks again for joining me. I appreciate you being here. Me and you, we go way back, actually, and we're going to be talking about the Rose Bowl and the Rose Bowl game itself. Yes. Funny fact, before we get started, I don't know if you remember this, but The first time I met you was when we covered the Rose Bowl. It was my first Rose Bowl. I believe it might have been your first Rose Bowl too. It was at Disneyland. It was the Disneyland event for our first Rose Bowl.
Yes, that was it. That was back when it was okay for players to be out in the public.
Yeah. A lot of things have changed since then, haven't they?
Definitely. I think we'll be talking a lot about that in just a second.
Yes, we will, especially in regards to the Rose Bowl game itself. But it's been a busy couple days just for the both of us, a couple weeks actually. For those who don't know, obviously I cover UCLA football. Adam Grossbard for the Southern California News Group covers USC football. We'll have plenty of time to talk about those teams on another episode. But just going to the Rose Bowl game, the Rose Bowl game, agrees with the CFP on something, and it was a big one, right? They were finally able to expand. Well, the expansion for the college football playoff was going to happen regardless if the Rose Bowl agreed or not. But because they agreed when they did, we're able to push it forward here a little bit, and we're going to get it a lot earlier. And by that, I mean the expansion. What were your thoughts when you first kind of heard about the early expansion after all the talk of whether or not it was actually going to happen?
I mean, that's kind of what college football has been missing, right? They've been missing that element from college basketball where you can have a team like a St. Peter's suddenly make a deep run in the tournament. That's been really missing from football. And I don't think the system completely fixes that in terms of like, it's only 12 teams, which I mean, really, that's realistically as much as you can do for college football. But you're not going to get a ton of teams that are outside of the traditional powers making it every year. But you are going to get at least one, maybe two, depending on how the conferences play out. But you're going to get the six highest rated conference champions, which theoretically in 1 year could be two teams from outside of the Power Five. And you're going to get those teams with a chance to compete. Maybe it's because I'm an SMU alum. I like that idea of, underdog having a shot at just making the tournament. But I think it's going to be good for the sport in general. It's going to drive a lot more interest. And I mean, there's going to be some really fun games coming up in this new format.
No doubt about it. I think that's the biggest thing. You want to, if you're a fan of college football and those respective teams out there, you want to be able to not only look at your schedule and know there's hope, but know you have a chance that if you do what you have to do, that your team does have a chance to be in the college football playoff. Obviously, that was kind of unlikely over the last couple of years when you had your almost, I don't want to say automatic, but you had your usual kind of suspects of Clemson, Alabama. You're starting to see some Ohio State was kind of always in the mix in one way or another. So it was kind of almost predictable. I'm glad we're kind of moving away from that. I know for you, it was something you were probably kind of keeping your eye on pretty closely with USC up into the wire here. They would have been a shoo-in, I would imagine, even though they don't win the Pac-12 championship. Based on rankings, they probably still would have got in. Did you do any of the math or anything on that as looking ahead to what would have been a 12-team playoff?
I mean, yeah, so under this new format, the top four conference champions will get a bye, right? Mm-hmm. And then the next four highest teams get a home playoff game. So theoretically, under this new format, this USC was in 5 through 8, it would have hosted a playoff game at the Coliseum in the first round and then played one of the top four teams if it advanced. Or vice versa, if it were outside of the 5 through 8 seeds, USC could have been going on the road to a cold weather environment or something like that. But that is really where the Rose Bowl comes in, as the Rose Bowl would be involved, not in that first round in this new college football playoff, but in the quarter and semifinals.
Yeah, and you speak of the quarter and the semifinal there, just to kind of catch everyone up to speed. And one thing that I'm curious to get your thoughts on too, Adam, is just going to be is just where the Rose Bowl game goes from here. Obviously, we're used to the Big Ten and the Pac-12 being that matchup more often than not every year. But they are going to be hosting, and by they, I mean the Rose Bowl game. They're going to be hosting a semifinal game next year for that 2023-24 season. But for this year, actually this week, they will be playing a normal Big Ten Pac-12 matchup. You're going to have Penn State and you're going to have Utah. We'll be talking more about that matchup here in a minute. But just again, what are your thoughts on that? That we're going to lose some of this tradition that we're used to. We're keeping some of it, and we'll get into some of that in a minute. There's a lot to talk about, Adam. But just in terms of the conferences and knowing that you're usually going to get that Big 10, Pac-12 matchup, we're losing that element of the Rose Bowl game. What are your thoughts on some of that kind of going away?
I mean, I'm a Pasadena kid, grew up in South Pass, grew up working on, the South Pass Rose Float. I care a lot about those traditions, and it's kind of hard to imagine. I think the biggest thing, and the thing that's really was a complicating factor in why the Rose Bowl held out, is the Rose Bowl wanted to keep its January 1st, 2:00 local kickoff time. For good reason. It's iconic. Everyone in the world watches the sun set on Pasadena every year. And it's really a huge tradition out here. That won't necessarily be the case that the Rose Bowl is played on that date anymore moving forward, because some years Rose Bowl will be a quarterfinal, and more likely than not, a quarterfinal will be played before New Year's Day. And that'll be really weird to think about the Rose Bowl game being played in late December instead of the first day of January. And that's kind of hard to imagine, and kind of feels like kind of like the rose ceremony's peaking too early, because that's always like really the culmination right after the parade.
Mhm.
So that's going to be bizarre. So just to be clear, next year the Rose Bowl was already scheduled
Mhm.
to be a semifinal location. Next year will not be an expansion year. There'll still be a 14 playoff, and the Rose Bowl will either host number 1 versus number 4, number 2 versus number 3.
Mhm.
But then it's the year after, I believe, that the Rose
Yep.
Bowl is a quarterfinal location for the 2024-2025
Mhm.
football season. And that's where things are going to start to change a little bit for the whole traditions around here.
Yeah, a little bit. So though, yeah, the next 2 years after this game, or after the semifinal next year, the next 2 seasons after that will be quarterfinal games. And based on what they have on the college football playoff website, and obviously some of this stuff can change potentially, but everything for right now that is scheduled, that they've had scheduled 3 years out, has the game on January 1st. So obviously we're getting the game on January 2nd just because it falls on a Sunday for 2023. But going forward, the next 3 Rose Bowl games after that are at least going to be on January 1st. Now, they don't list a time, but I think maybe based on the agreement, maybe the 2 o'clock spot will kind of stay in place as well. But I think it's beyond that will kind of be the mystery. I remember talking to Laura Farber, who was the president of the Rose Bowl Association, or Rose Parade Association, if I'm not mistaken. But she has a lot of insight in her new role and is just kind of working with the Rose Bowl itself. And one of the things she said is that it was kind of almost like a leap of faith, right? And there has to be some sort of demonstration of good faith that, hey, we're going to work this out, but just for everybody involved, let's just get this thing rolling and get the early expansion going. And then once we need to get to it or get a little bit closer to it, we can kind of work out some of those finer details. So it still remains to be seen what it is that will be stripped away, I guess you can say, in terms of the traditions that involve the Rose Bowl game and the Rose Parade and everything that comes with that. But one thing that did stick out with me that Laura Farber did say was that they do plan to remain flexible as needed. So we'll see how flexible they are going to be.
Because I think one other thing that could change is what you're going to see these 5 through 8 seeds get a home game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden there's going to be people wondering, like, why don't the 1s through 4 get a home game too?
Yeah.
Because it's a huge chance for revenue for the schools. It's going to be an insane environment, like a home game at the University of Michigan in late December, snow going crazy. It'll be one of the most memorable things we'll have seen in college football in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so then if suddenly there's a cry for home games for the quarterfinals too, like you're suddenly really reducing the number of marquee matchups that are available for these traditional bowl games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that's been interesting, I don't know if you heard Joe Klatt's comments from Fox Sports recently, where he mentioned that he thinks, and I guess maybe it would be canceling out some of the home field advantage teams would have by playing in their own home stadiums, but maybe having more of these bowl games, the Cotton Bowl and some of these other major 6 bowl games, or the other 5 bowl games aside from the Rose Bowl, kind of maybe filling in some of those gaps there. But then at the end of it all, having the championship game being the Rose Bowl every year, I think maybe that's a little unlikely, but it hasn't disappointed in the past. I mean, you look at USC in Texas, right?
I mean, yeah, it's a great environment, but there's a
Mhm.
lot of mouths to feed.
Oh, yes, and there was a hold up the whole thing, but I mean, we made it this far. Any other thoughts getting here with Penn State in Utah, but Yeah, anything really just kind of stand out? Obviously, this is the oldest active bowl game, and I think, just in terms of it continuing to stay relevant, right? I think for me that was the biggest thing, because imagine the Rose Bowl game not being a part of any of this playoff stuff going forward. That'd be kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then you're having like really low level matchups that because of the
Hmm.
playoffs, like those other bowl games just aren't going to get the viewership or interest that they might have gotten in years past. And you're just, you're getting maybe the second best team in the Pac-12 or the third best team, and then
Hmm.
the third or fourth best team in the Big Ten, if you're keeping that matchup and not
Right.
trying to, you know, just get the best teams available. So you don't want to be left out because the quality of games, right now we got a great matchup coming up
Hmm.
next week. It's two really, really, really good teams. And you lose that possibility with if you are left out of the playoff.
And I think it's just interesting too, based on like the circumstances. But like you said, just using this year as an example with Utah and Penn State. Obviously, Utah won the Pac-12 championship. They beat USC not once but twice this year. But obviously, beating them in that championship game moves them up into that Rose Bowl game spot. But then you also have Penn State, who is third in the Big Ten conference. Yeah, they were third in the Big Ten conference. They didn't play in the championship game. Neither did Ohio State for the conference championship game. But here they are. They do get the invite. We have seen, I think, Ohio State the last 2 or 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. They managed because USC it all goes full circle, Adam. Utah beat USC, which brought Ohio State back into the mix. So it was kind of it's just kind of crazy how college football works, but everything works out for the right reason, some would say. So yeah, just kind of your thoughts on the matchup. I think it's, I'll get into the Penn State side of it here in a minute, but just curious, you've seen Utah play a few times. I've seen Utah play at at the Rose Bowl earlier this year when they played UCLA. UCLA did get the best of them. So just in general for Utah, I mean, they're not coming in too hot in Rose Bowl games, or at the Rose Bowl, I should say, just because they lost to UCLA this season. And then they had the Rose Bowl game last year against Ohio State. That was a good game, but they fall short. What do you know about Utah coming into this year?
I would say that they are a better team than they were last year,
Wow, you think so?
as well as not playing as good of an opponent.
Hmm.
They as they did last year. No disrespect to Penn State, but last year's Ohio State team was very, very, very good.
Oh yeah.
I think so. I think because the offense is so dynamic this year for Utah. Dalton Kincaid is a bad dude
Hmm.
at tight end. He is physical. He makes the catch. What he did in the first game against USC, where he just,
Yeah.
I think 16, 17 catches for over 200 yards, most of it coming in the second half. Like he took over that game like a star basketball player in the second half. He just
Yeah.
took it over, carried it, broke tackles, dragged Utah down the field with him.
Yeah.
Really
Right.
amazing to watch. Cam Rising is a really talented, gutty
Mhm.
quarterback. They've got a really good run game. They've got a lot of different guys for them to throw to. And they are just really tough and physical up front on both sides of the ball. I think they're one of the only Pac-12 teams that I feel like could go up against the Penn State starting lines and like really go man for man with them.
Yep.
And I don't think they're going to be surprised by the physicality of Big Ten football at all in this game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And they showed some of that last year too. So I'm expecting a good game. I mean, Penn State comes into this one. Previously, just in Rose Bowl appearances, they're 1-3. And one thing I'm excited about too, Adam, and I guess I didn't know this, but usually a lot of the teams, I guess when you cover conference games year after year, the history between teams are so deep in the series between teams. This is the first meeting between Penn State and Utah. Obviously, Penn State's been in a few. I believe last year was the first Rose Bowl game for Utah, right?
Yes, that was their first ever. And once
Mhm.
again, they are coming out with some beautiful helmets with the roses intertwined with the
Oh,
U logo,
I didn't
just
see
like last year. And
that.
that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, Utah really knows how to do it up well. I know they did the helmets honoring their fallen teammates earlier this year. as well. But yeah, so Penn State, just on the Penn State side, they've only had 2 losses this year. Both of them were against Michigan and Ohio State, teams that also probably would have been considered for the Rose Bowl game this year. But they were among those 4 teams that are going to be playing in the playoffs. So obviously, congratulations to them. So Penn State isn't a slouch. They played against some top competition, and I don't think Utah is going to be any different. I mean, they're going to play them tough, and they're going to have to earn it. It's not going to be a cakewalk for sure for either one of these teams. Penn State quarterback Sean Clifford arrived on campus just months after the last time Penn State played in a Rose Bowl game back in 2017. So this will be his first shot to lead Penn State into the Rose Bowl, and he's been there for 6 years. It's flown by so quick, just his career along with several others. But yeah, he's leading. He's made a career for himself at Penn State. He's leading the team obviously in passing with over 200, 500 yards, 22 touchdowns. He does have 7 interceptions in the 12 games that he has played. Hasn't missed a whole lot of time this year. And he holds several records in just about every passing category there is along the way. The one thing that's interesting for me, Adam, and you can maybe kind of compare this for Utah's defense in terms of how they did with USC's run game when you were able to see that. But Penn State is coming into this with their backfield featuring just 2 true freshmen. They combined for over 1,700 yards and 19 touchdowns on the ground. A lot of times you're not seeing 1 true freshman in the backfield, let alone 2, but Penn State has done successfully that this year. But what are your thoughts on the run game for Utah? Was there anything that stood out? I know Travis Dye was obviously a guy in some of those USC Utah games, but what did you see from the defense there for Utah in terms of stopping the run?
I mean, those were probably USC's 2 worst rushing performances of the year were against Utah. Like, it was very, very clear in the first matchup that Utah was going to take away the run and challenge USC to beat them really on short and intermediate routes. And USA was able to adapt and score 6 touchdowns in that game, but Utah really took away the run from them. And then this last game is kind of hard to judge because USC had so many injured offensive linemen. They were like down 2 of their best players on the line, including 1 possible first, likely second-round pick, and Andrew Voorhees didn't play at all. And that really threw USC's run blocking for a loop in that game. I think the thing I'm most interested in, usually when we get ready for this Pac-12 Big Ten matchup at the end of the year, we're talking about how the Big Ten comes in as the more tested team and the Pac-12 team might not be ready for that level of competition. I actually think it's the exact opposite this year.
Yep.
The Pac-12 was really top to bottom a much deeper conference than the Big Ten. Penn State, you really look at their schedule, and they tried, they scheduled years in advance a game against Auburn that they thought would be a good non-conference opportunity for them. Auburn was awful this year. And otherwise, Penn State really didn't play that tough of competition except for those 2 games you mentioned, Michigan and Ohio State, and they lost both of them.
Yep.
One of them in pretty embarrassing fashion. So I think honestly, Utah is the more tested team coming into this game. Had to play Oregon, UCLA, USC. You had Washington and Oregon State and Washington State all had really good years. Arizona was pretty good this season. Pac-12 was just the deeper league, and I think Utah comes out. Yeah, they dropped 3 games this year, 2 of them in conference play, but that's a good Utah team, and I think that they're going to be really ready for the physicality of Penn State.
I think you make a good point there, because in the Pac-12 you had a little bit, and Utah saw a little bit of everything, whether that was Zach Charbonnet and DTR and what they can do in that kind of offense, and Utah finding a way to scheme and try to make something out of that. They play against Caleb Williams and Travis Dye, Michael Penix, and so many other teams. Just the Pac-12 is loaded, so they're gonna. They're battle tested, and you're right, with Penn State they haven't seen a whole lot of that. It was just kind of like you had the 3 teams, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and then it was kind of like after you had Purdue in that conference championship game because of their division. And I don't remember that game being all that exciting. I'm pretty sure it was a blowout. If not, it felt that way. So yeah, that's why I think earlier in the show when I mentioned, I was like, I'm trying to remember if Penn State actually finished or like what was the reason for Purdue being the third or being the team in there, but I think it was just based on division. But yeah, but and maybe even can you speak to some of that too? I think I'm trying to remember if that helped Utah's case with them moving away from divisions this year, right? Because normally you wouldn't have gotten USC Utah. You would have had one of the teams from the north. So that probably benefits now that I think back about it. There's just been so
Utah
much
really needed like a perfect storm of events to get into this. They needed
Mhm.
UCLA to win in the last week of the season. They needed Washington to beat Washington State. Utah needed to beat Colorado, and they needed Oregon State to beat Oregon. And it was absolutely perfect.
Right.
And that was just the last weekend of the year. Utah needed all those results to go the right way. And it literally took like an insane comeback by Oregon State in the second half of, I'm not allowed to say the old name of that rivalry anymore. But it's just really, really crazy what it took for Utah to get there. And you kind of go into that Pac-12 championship game like Utah got the best game of Cam Rising's career and the best game of Dalton Kincaid's career to beat USC the first time around. Can that happen twice? And the Utes absolutely did it. And they were just physical and punishing and ready for that moment. They just made the USC defense look completely out of sorts. Looked like they forgot how to tackle against that physical Utah team. And so I think the Utes are going to be, that's my choice for this game, personally.
Mine too, no doubt about it. And it's kind of interesting that I even say that. It's almost kind of like egg on my face because I kind of remember it, in a way, writing Utah off at some point during this season when they lost to UCLA. UCLA had a pretty good squad, but I'm like, oh, like maybe the tide is turning here, not only for UCLA, but just for Utah, maybe taking a step back the other way. But all of a sudden, here they come, much like you laid out. They come charging back and putting themselves in a position to still be in the hunt early or later on into the season, and it paid off for them. And so here they are. So they're coming in hot and with some confidence, that's for sure. Having beaten a Heisman Trophy winner in Caleb Williams, among others. Obviously, there was an injury there for Caleb, but yeah, it should be a good matchup. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, that's football for you, right, Adam?
That's football.
So before we go, anything else kind of come to mind for you, or is there any, you said you kind of grew up in the area. Do you have an early Rose Bowl memory or like an early Rose Bowl game memory? What is the earliest Rose Bowl you remember? Do you remember one that far back?
Earliest I remember, wow, that's not cool. I just, in South Pass, we were right under the route of the bomber, where the bomber would fly over during the parade and during the game. And so I just remember we would watch it on TV and you just hear the rumbling and we'd go outside, up at the planes and stuff like that. And that's always been kind of my biggest Rose Parade and Rose Bowl memory, other than like my grandmother taking me out to go watch the South Pass float being built. So yeah, if you got some time this week, go volunteer on your local floats.
No doubt about it. Yeah, make sure you go volunteer and help put some of those floats together, or go check them out after. I remember that was one of the early memories for me. My uncle would take me and my family down the day before, or actually, so New Year's Eve, way before, and catch some of those floats start lining up. And then obviously for me now being able to cover some of these Rose Bowl games has been quite the treat. One, just trying to get down there early enough and beat all that traffic to get into the game, but it's well worth it. And to see the crowd and just to feel that press box rock in the way that it does the last couple years. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to the next time I'm covering a game with you, Adam. It's always been fun. This has been fun. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Make sure you guys are checking out the Southern California News Group's family of papers, including the Pasadena Star News and the OCRegister.com. Thank you guys so much. Hey, Adam, thanks again for.
Oh, my goodness. That was a lot of info. Thank you so much. I have to say, though, my family's from Pennsylvania. I'm still not going to give up on Penn State. Just got to say that.
As you should. You shouldn't. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, even last year we didn't really expect Utah to have a chance against powerhouse Ohio State, and they kept it a close game. Ohio State did get the better of Utah, but a lot better of a game than I expected. So I've decided not to really kind of lean one way or another. It's just kind of let them play and let's have a game.
Well, it'll be fun. What have we got coming up in our coverage?
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Actually, both teams are out at Disneyland right now, kind of doing the nice little festivities. One of the perks of being in the Rose Bowl game is that you get a trip to Disneyland, which is fun, right? Especially for some of these teams that aren't in California or lived in California, they get to go to Disneyland. So that's fun. I'll be out at some of the media availability talking with both the defense for Utah and the offense for Penn State and going to those practices tomorrow on Thursday. And then I'll be back out there on Friday to talk to Utah's offense and Penn State's defense, as well as attending practice then. But also, Sam, we do have UCLA playing Pitt in the Sun Bowl later this week. And we do have USC and Tulane playing in the Cotton Bowl, which is where Adam is going to be covering for the group. And real quick, before we kind of wrap things up, I do want to mention one correction. I mentioned that Ohio State was going to be playing in the Sugar Bowl. That's incorrect. They're actually going to be playing in the Peach Bowl against Georgia in the semifinal game on Saturday. So just want a quick correction there. But yeah, all of the games that I mentioned in every semifinal game and everything for college football going forward, we will have covered for you guys at the Pasadena Star News, PasadenaStarNews.com, and the LA Daily News, DailyNews.com.
And OC Register and any of our 11 papers. The sports department has you covered. So thanks so much, James.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And thanks, Adam, and thanks, Joe, and thanks for all that great information. And if you want more great information and insights into the Tournament of Roses or the Rose Bowl, look at the Rose Magazine for subscribers for the Southern California newspapers. And if you don't want to miss out, go to scng.com/subscribe, and you can find your local paper. Meanwhile, you can catch up on the virtual programs you've missed by going to scng.com/virtual events. Or, if you're confused about anything, give us a call at 877-469-6133. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or if you have additional questions, or if you have suggestions, please email us at events@scng.com. Thanks again for your support. And hey, enjoy this year's Rose Bowl. Go Penn.